At the end of the last video, I talked about how there were a bunch more games from the 1-Bit Game Jam I really wanted to talk about. There are so many cool projects to come out of this jam that I want to talk about, so here are 3 more 1-Bit games based on the theme of shock. Zip Zap is a game developed by T-Bleezy. It's a fast-paced platformer where you jump into enemies to damage them, roll around loop-de-loops, and hit off bumpers to maintain momentum. I'm sure most people who've played a Sonic the Hedgehog game in their life will recognize the primary inspiration for this game, and this is an inspiration that the developers have acknowledged in the game's description. I really do enjoy seeing a smaller developer or development team creating this kind of project, taking a classic gameplay formula for a series which is defunct or has shifted focus, and putting their own spin on the gameplay, visuals, narrative, or any other number of things. I would argue that that's how we got Stardew Valley, as an adaptation of Harvest Moon, and I would encourage anyone who is stuck for ideas on what kind of project to create to make something like this. It is, however, apparent that this game takes significant inspiration from the classic Sonic games. What spin do they put on the concept of Sonic to distinguish themselves? I think that firstly, visually, this game takes full advantage of its 1-bit art style, and the strengths of this art style to create a visual clarity which remains even when your character is traveling at high speeds. I think that the design of both the enemies and our protagonist in particular have this sort of glow to them, which really helps them stand out amongst the environments. The music also has this almost dingy feeling to it that I think adds a sense of urgency to the gameplay. It really makes you feel like you gotta go fast. Gameplay-wise, there are a few things which sets this game apart from its inspiration. For one, it's harder to build momentum in this game without any boosters or bounce pad to aid you. Once you do get going, it's pretty easy to keep momentum as long as you don't meet face to face with walls or a spike pit, but the character takes just a split second to start moving once you press the movement key, which makes momentum feel a little bit more earned, but can be slightly frustrating during the slower platforming sections of the game. Health also works differently in this game, and serves to make the gameplay just a bit more challenging. You have this charge meter on the side of the screen, which builds up when you collect these little lightning bolts or when you're moving at high speeds. This meter functions as your health bar. When you run into an enemy, you lose about half of this, and when you run into a spike pit, you lose all of it. You can also expend half your health for this AoE effect, giving the player a way to gamble their health, which I am always a fan of. I do think the fact that you run past most of the enemies, and the fact that it takes away almost all of your health in a game where you're only ever 2 hits away from death, does lower the incentive to use the zap attack, but I do really like the design philosophy about this attack. The game is 1 level long, with 3 hidden fuses to collect. I think that there is definitely room for some more expansion and more levels, maybe in the same zone using the same assets, with a higher density of enemies, so that there is more of an incentive to use the zap, and more high momentum sections, because that always gets the dopamine receptors firing. If you enjoy speedrunning, or just short games in general, you should definitely give this a try. Dynamo Frank is a game by Fetmo, Demuri, and Data Goblin. It's an isometric puzzle game where you take on the role of one of the classic gothic horror icons trying to escape a lab. Before I talk about anything else in this game, I just want to point out that the game lets you select which song you want to listen to while playing. I really like this feature, and I think that more games that do not have designated music for certain areas should take absolute full advantage of this feature. As the titular Frank, you have 2 main abilities at your disposal. You can scare humans, which is used to crowd control these scientists and get them to stand on switches. You also have the ability to collect and administer electric charges. You can collect these from light bulbs in the lab, and they can be used on other light bulbs which power various appliances in the lab. They can also be used to shock scientists into standing still if you need them in a specific spot. Lastly, there are guards which will shoot you on sight. I think that this is one aspect of the game I wish was a little bit more fleshed out. The guards never posed much threat to me, and I always felt that I could just move around them. I think that maybe if you were forced to interact with them more, or if there were more of them in the levels, they would feel a little bit vestigial. But as is, it's not too big of an issue. As with many of the games I cover, I love the visuals for this game. But one thing I particularly like about the visuals is the floor of the levels and how it contrasts with the area outside the lab. I think it can be hard sometimes to distinguish between spaces in a 1-bit art style beyond putting a wall or a floor or some other barrier between them, but I think that creating a pattern, even if it's just a few dots, can lend to contrasting two different areas on the same axis. This is used to great effect, contrasting both the outside from the inside, but also the different areas on the inside which can't be accessed directly from one another. The game sports 5 levels, all of which I really enjoyed. I thought that the 5th level in particular was really clever. The setup is that you have to scare this scientist onto this button to reach a door that you can't move fast enough to get to. I won't spoil the solution, but I thought it was really cool. At the end, you come to the outside of the lab and you have to turn on these 3 bulbs to get the ending, which I will leave for you to watch yourself. If you enjoy puzzle games in any way, I strongly recommend that you give this game a try. Zipcross is a game developed by Spielpopik23. The game is a level-based platformer. Unlike Zip Zap, it borrows a lot more from the Mario school of platforming, although it does have some light speedrunning elements to it. You play as this guy, no name or motivation given, and you just gotta get to the end of each level. Once you do so, you win. The game is very straightforward in what it is, and it doesn't waste time pretending to be something that it's not. You have a very simple kit of moves. You can move, sprint, jump, attach to zip lines, and charge up to release a shock to destroy obstacles, and these panels which keep the exit doors locked. Once again, I think that this game is a good example of how to take advantage of a 1-bit art style. The particle effects in this game create some depth to the visuals, and the way that the objects in the background are contrasted with the platforms and interactable objects by not having a solid outline and only being defined in patterns is very clever, and makes the whole experience much more visually engaging. The platforming in this game is quite enjoyable, and I think that the sense of momentum the character has, along with the floatiness of this character, lends quite well to the slower pace of some of the platforming. Although where Zip Zap has slower acceleration, this game has slower deceleration, which can sometimes fail you on some of the moments of precision platforming. One thing about this game I absolutely have to mention is the collision on the platforms. There are never any issues in terms of the clipping or phasing through any of the blocks. Rather, there are several points where the collision of certain walls was not extended far enough up, letting you do this. I don't hate this by any means. I think it's really cool, and I'm always a fan of platforming sections which take an open approach to how their players explore and move through the space. But I can only assume this was not the developers' intentions when it came to navigating the world they created, and sometimes this lack of collision lets you skip full areas of levels. I had fun exploiting this while I played, but I imagine that the developers would probably want to implement some changes to this if they were going to go any further with Zipcross. Eventually, we reach the end of the 7 or so levels, and true to the form of Zipcross, we get this absolute banger of a you win screen. If you love classic platformers, I would highly recommend you give this a try. And there you have it, another 3 games about shock. Very quickly, I want to recommend one last game that is particularly short. It's called 3:46 AM. It's from the same jam, and it was absolutely another one of my favorites from this jam, but there isn't really enough content to make a single segment out of one of these without spoiling the play value, so I think that you should just go check it out for yourself. And if you enjoyed, be sure to subscribe. And if you have any thoughts on any of these games, be sure to leave a comment. I love hearing what other people think about these kinds of projects. Bye bye.